And let's see, we are officially live, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Henry Oster to this interview, and he has asked me to please call him Henry, so we will call him Henry. And Henry is a retired optometrist, but more importantly, he is also a Holocaust survivor. And we're going to spend some time with him learning about what he has been through, perhaps maybe even try and work out how it is that he has come to be here despite all the things that have been thrown at him. And I think the best way to start off is to perhaps ask you to give us a brief introduction on where it all started. And in fact, no, before we get there, I know we're going to talk about the fact that in your youth, around the age of 13, that is when you were first taken to the ghetto, the Lot's ghetto. Is that correct?
Right.
But before that, I want to talk about Henry as a young boy and the family and where you grew up and what sort of things do you remember from that part of your youth?
Okay. I was born in 1928, so nobody has to take out a pad to figure out how old I am. I'm 89 years old. I was born in the city of Cologne, which was considered to be one of the happiest cities in Germany. Culturally advanced in everything, very democratic, believe it or not. And anti-Semitism was not very obvious. I had a very large family. I had immediate relatives, meaning uncles and aunts and grandparents and cousins of 19, of which I, until recently, was the only survivor, with the exception of an uncle of mine who was able to leave Germany and come to the United States. And that is a very critical factor in that family. Mm-hmm. The family lived in Germany well over 180 years. They were a prominent family. My father was a director of a department store, and it was a fairly good life to lead as a little boy till I went to school in 1934. The first day in school, we were harassed and spat on and many different things by children of slightly larger age, all in Hitler Youth uniforms. And from that day on, things became, shall we say, mysteriously different from a normal life. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws were declared, and with that, every Jew in Germany lost every position, business, any kind of status by the loss of your citizenship and civil rights. My father was out of work, and so was everybody else. I, on the other hand, did not think it was the worst year, because at that age of 7, I no longer were permitted to go to school, and I thought that was kind of nice, not realizing what it meant. We were no longer allowed to assemble. Signs appeared everywhere, on the streetcar, on the buses, on cinemas, everywhere you looked, and sign, Jews are forbidden to enter. You could not participate. We lost our apartment. They raided the apartment and took whatever they thought was of value, including something that was a rarity in those days. We had a radio. You see, the Nazi had given free radios, not to Jews, but free radios, so that Hitler could communicate and be listened to in as many households as possible. My father was no longer allowed to work. He was forced to go to a forced labor battalion building the defensive line around Germany, between Germany and France. We had to abandon our apartment. We had to move into 1 bedroom and a small kitchen, which we had to share with with 8 other people, because they lost it too. And we were just more or less hopelessly stuck in Germany because there was no way to get out. Germany did encourage Jews to leave. In 1933, there were approximately 600,000 Jews in all of Germany, in a population of 60 million Germans. And that 1% desperately tried to get out, but Germany did encourage Jews to leave until about 1936, just the year of the Olympics. Thereafter, it became almost impossible. The worst part was there wasn't a country in the world that would let you in. So to flee Germany, to where? It was just desperation. There were exceptions, like one uncle of mine was able to come to the United States miraculously as late as the beginning of 1938. In 1938, November 9th, things went wrong in Germany physically against the Jews with Kristallnacht, with all the establishment having still been permitted to exist, like the Jewish centers, community centers. Jewish businesses were already closed in 35, except those that were allowed to remain open to supply the Jewish population. They were smashed. The synagogues were burned. Everything that was with any Jewish connotation was simply burned, and actually gave the name to the whole catastrophe, holocaust, which means to burn. The reflecting flames on the glass shards, the broken glass of the damaged and destroyed stores, gave the night of crystal its name. The Germans called, that was their facetious way to call it. Then on September 1, 1939, Germany declared war by invading Poland. And that was the critical point in the Holocaust. It was estimated that in Germany there were only approximately 300,000 remaining Jews. But with the invasion of Poland, they inherited 3 million Polish Jews. And with the intent to eradicate all Jews in Europe, they had to start somewhere there. And that's why they built the extermination camps purely in Poland. Now, the concentration camps were originally started when Hitler came to power. In 1 month, they built 14 concentration camps, of course, just in Germany, which were rapidly filled by Jewish population and anyone the German Nazi Party felt was not desirable. The political opponents, the gay population, male and female, they took in the huge number of gypsies, which were people that actually were constantly moving from country to country throughout Europe. They were interned. The concentration camps were not originally designed to be killing fields. Unfortunately, with malnutrition and torture, they became very rapidly infamous for a place that nobody ever wanted to be in, including the German population, which were threatened by concentration camps as any kind of a punishment for any kind of violation, real, imagined, or whatever. And so now Germany needed to have a way to eliminate 3 million people, including all the other Jews that they captured in all the countries they ultimately invaded. And so while it is true that 6.5 million Jews perished and were killed, it is not accurate, because there were 5 million additional people that Germans felt did not deserve to live. That basically is the Holocaust.
Wow. So now we've got a point of departure here. So if we start where you were 13 years old, you get put into a ghetto in a very confined space with many people, people restricting, you couldn't get in and out of the ghetto. It was basically a walled off section of the city. What were the conditions like then? Do you remember any of that?
Well, of course, every bit of it, every day. the the easiest way to control 3 million people, plus all the others that came in, like we were taken from Germany into a ghetto by the city of Lodz, which was the third largest city after Warsaw and Krakow. The way they could concentrate people were to take the most dilapidated, the completely devastated parts of a city, surrounded with wires and guards, and always with German shepherds, trained to kill. And that way they gradually diminished the population by nightly and daylight raids, grabbing people and sending them out never to be heard from again. We were ordered in January of 1941 to present ourselves to be deported. They put us on the train. We were allowed one small suitcase for 3 people and arrived in the city of Lodz, which the Germans had called Litzmannstadt. They gave, everything was Germanized. We were now sharing, my parents, I was an only child, my parents and I had to share a room with 18 other people. And a room is all it was. These were block buildings, 3 stories high, with nothing in it except rooms. No heat, no water, no electricity, no sanitary facilities. Just storing people into rooms with the idea that we were forced to work in various conditions. The ghetto was allowed to exist with the hope of manufacturing things for German military needs. My dad had to repair the fences. My mother had to make plates that went on the military boots. And a miracle of miracles, I was designated for the agriculture department. To this day, that is a joke. There are no agricultural facilities in buildings next to building in any kind of city, except there was a small abandoned playground that I noticed with a lawn, and an area from the building to the fence was an abandoned field that had never been used for anything. And I, with 30 other people, were forced to cultivate that, to dig. We were given a shovel and a rake and make anything the Germans felt they wanted to grow there, which was mostly potatoes, but we were also given other things, beans and peas and lentils and corn, which ended up being the salvation of survival in my case. My dad, unfortunately, did not last long. He died of starvation within 5 months of arrival. My mom and I managed to survive on the total food supply. Every Friday afternoon, each person received 1 loaf of bread. And the only other food is when you did work, you received a bowl of a cup of watery soup, mostly of cabbage, never designed to be nutritionally sufficient for survival. The death rate, the illness, the killing was enormous. Every time you went to work in the morning, you ended up seeing multiple corpses in the gutter of the street, which was the way they were collected and taken to a cemetery. To work 12 hours a day.
Let me ask you this. How does a 13-year-old boy reconcile all this death around you? I mean, how did you deal with the fact that you've actually got people dying literally in front of you, and every morning when you come out in the streets, there are new dead bodies?
Yes, including my dad.
So how did you deal with that?
You have no choice. You live in fear. In the ghetto, it was a picnic, as we say, compared to a concentration camp or extermination camp. You just had to do what you were told to do, not be observed, not to make any commotion, and just hope that nobody pays attention. You starve to death and you work together in the misery, especially at night when Poland can be incredibly cold, and all you had was to share body heat with the people in the room to manage to survive. It's just something you cannot control. You just have to have confidence you'll make it, or hope, and maybe what I call defiance. You had to be defiant. You had to find ways to help yourself, which is easier said than done. But working in the agriculture department, I was able to steal food at the risk of becoming what the Germans call Sunday's entertainment, which was the execution on that abandoned playground for any real, imaginary, or contrived violation. And that kept the population doing what they had to do. And then, of course, the constant fear, will I be taken in any of the daylight, especially nighttime raids? These people disappeared and never returned. We did not know at the time, we did not know that they were being sent to extermination facilities, of which there were 5 big ones in Poland. We never knew that until we got there ourselves.
Wow. So I mean, you're now going through a very difficult time in this ghetto, and you are in the ghetto for how long?
3 years.
3 years, and then they get you to pack up and they ship you where?
No, you don't pack up. Oh, such civil things. We were in 44, we were required to present ourselves between the 2 German administrative buildings to receive an insignia or a label or anything, quote, to bring in the harvest for that year. And they say, you can bring your family and they can work with you. So I got my mom. We stood there waiting for the certificate or the paper, and we were immediately taken to a train and shipped off. No idea where we're going. Absolutely no clue. We arrived a day and a half later. We were taken off the train in the middle of the night. The Germans did everything at nighttime, always disorienting the people, always with lights, barking dogs, weapons pointed at you. We arrived in a place and the train stopped for the afternoon, just for the Germans to wait for the darkness of night. The train proceeded. The doors were ripped open. We were ripped out, torn out, threatened by the German dogs to be killing people, attacking them. A lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, guns going off into the air. And we were on a platform, immediately separated, women to one side, men to the other. My mother was taken away as if a tornado had taken away with such force. We were then, and I saw merging into a slowly marching column of women on the other side of the platform. That was the last time I ever saw my mom. I was now with adult males. We were now selected by having Mengele look at people. He was interested for mostly to find twins for medical research. And he looked at you for a second or two, pointed you to the right or to the left. I was pointed to the right. We entered a barrack. We were shaven. We had to strip. We were washed down for a few seconds and pushed out the end of the barrack. And I found myself like a courtyard against the building with an enormous smokestack and a huge flame and a very unfamiliar odor. And there were men dressed in blue and white striped uniforms, and they said, "Welcome to Auschwitz." And that was the first time I had ever heard about it. The Polish population was, of course, 99% Polish. They knew the city in its Polish name because it used to be the military training ground for the Polish army. And so I was in Auschwitz. The other half of the column, pointed to the left, went into entered the adjacent barrack. also stripped. They were not washed down, but they were in the same identical bathing facility, shower heads. The doors were closed, gas was thrown in, and these were the gas chambers of Auschwitz. To be correct, Auschwitz is a name that covers a lot of different facilities. And the actual arrival point of all the trains from Europe to Auschwitz was called Birkenau. That was the facility of the gas chambers, holding 90,000 plus people in barracks, and also the crematorium. That was the gray building, which I found out very quickly what it meant. The other problem was that you had no way of knowing what you could do. I did not know what Auschwitz meant. Auschwitz was actually a separate concentration camp about a mile or two away from Birkenau. That facility was to hold people to be put to forced labor. In Birkenau, you were just being kept. A slice of bread, an occasional soup, you died, you died. The life expectancy was approximately 4 to 6 weeks. And the most remarkable statistic, that all arriving juveniles had to at least look to be older than 15. Otherwise, you died the day you arrived. There were only 0.08, not even 1/10 of 1% of arriving juveniles in Birkenau, Auschwitz that survived.
Wow. So basically, as soon as you came in, if you were not 15 or you didn't look 15, that was it.
You were not, you did not survive the day. No. In all the facilities, in the other facilities around Poland, you had nobody survive. Only Birkenau, Auschwitz. The other one, like Treblinka, Sobibor, all the others were only for extermination. There were no barracks to house people. You arrived with the typical Nazi punctuality. When the trains arrived, people were unloaded. They had phony things, buildings with the Star of David. They had flowers on the wall. They had music playing. They had the Star of David, making it look like it's a synagogue. You walked into gas chambers and crematorium. Auschwitz-Birkenau was different because there was a lot of work that needed to be done for the war effort the Nazis were fighting, and you were simply housed, and periodically they called for volunteers to be put to work, they claimed. As a relatively small boy of 15 at that time, they told me, the adults said, whatever you do, don't ever volunteer. You never know what you volunteer for. One day on the latrine, somebody came in yelling, they're looking for juvenile volunteers. To this day, the rest of my life, I will never know what made me do the extreme opposite what everybody said. And indeed, 130 boys and myself were selected. I even yelled, hey, I speak German, thinking it was an advantage over everybody else, which were mostly from all other countries. As a matter of fact, at the end of the war, it's claimed that fewer than 30 German-born boys under the age of 18 were found in all the camps in Europe. A really strange statistic. We were put on trucks. First, we were given a tattoo. Nobody received a tattoo except in Birkenau, and only when you left, never when you arrived, because nobody needed to know a number because you were not expected to survive. But when you were put to work or any use, military use, many other purposes for taking youngsters, you were given a tattoo. In all of Birkenau, Auschwitz, only 165 boys and 131 that had been selected to live actually ever left that camp. All the others perished.
Wow. Now, Henry, the tattoo that you got, did the number have any special significance in the sense
None that we know of. The Germans obviously lined us up, the 131, and gave us the number in sequence.
And how did they get the tattoo?
How?
Did they use like a tattoo, you know, like a tattoo artist would do it? Or did they?
No, that didn't exist in those days. That was point by point by point with a hypodermic needle. It took a long time. It was very painful. And it was just only, and I repeat, only when you were designated and selected to leave Birkenau to wherever else you might be going. No other concentration camp in Europe gave tattoos.
Can we see your tattoo?
Sure. Yeah, let me see how that comes across.
A little higher up. And that's it.
You need more light?
No, we can see that there's a 7, a 6.
B7648.
B7648. So B for Birkenau?
No, they had sequences before they realized how many people would get a tattoo. They just had the number 1 with the sequence of number following. Then they switched to number 2 with a sequence. Then they switched to A, and at the end to B, and only 20,000 for each number. A 20,000, B 20,000. It never got to B 20,000 because that was too late when they took us out. So it was just, it was to demean you and to dehumanize you.
Of course, of course. Now, when you were in the camps, you know, it's one thing knowing that people are dying of illness and of hunger and starvation in the ghetto, and possibly seeing the occasional execution within the ghetto. But here in the extermination camp, were you seeing people being exterminated on a daily basis?
Well, they were selected. The brutality that you witnessed were the individual Nazi SS that went through the camp with clubs, with batons. They all had batons, and they were very quick to hit. If you made any particular remark or did not follow orders, it would not be surprising to be beaten to death. You saw, of course, other atrocities, which I don't want to go into. Mm-hmm. You had many people actually not be able to take it, and maybe at night would hit and climb on the electrified wires to commit suicide. The tortures that you saw and witnessed were not always witnessed by us because they put us to work. Because when we arrived in the actual concentration camp of Auschwitz, away from Birkenau, they put us to work in stables. And we were forced to work 16 hours a day, taking care of horses that were pregnant, because the Germans needed a lot of horses in the war effort. And that actually gave us another chance to steal some food. In the ghetto, I was able to steal food, not enough time to go explain that right now, that allowed my mom and me to survive. In the concentration camp, we had only occasional courage to steal food that was supposed to be designated for the horses. One remarkable food source was When the little horses were born, and if you take them with the mother to the water trough to drink water, they're not supposed to drink water. They cannot tolerate it. We would at one time take the horses and allow them to drink, and the Germans went crazy thinking that the little horses all had caught a disease. And the reason we took it, somebody said, if you give them water, they develop digestive problems, diarrhea, making our work hell, to say the least, but they would also not nurse. And we would consume the mother's milk, the horse's mother's milk, as a supplement to our food.
Wow. I mean,
And it was never detected.
I mean, those are desperate times and desperate measures.
Oh, we don't have time to even go into what desperate measures really means.
Wow. So, and then, I mean, you are now pretty much working with a group of juveniles. I mean, have these kids all lost their parents and their family members too? Or
yes. No, everybody was torn away from their family. Occasionally, you might find brothers who were maybe a year or two apart. But in my group of 131, nobody had any other family members. No. No, you were just working among strangers.
And you must have formed a very close bond with them, because, I mean, these are very special circumstances to throw yourself.
You do not form a bond.
Wow.
Everybody was constantly in fear. The body felt that instead of blood, you had carbonated water running through it. Always a sensation of fear. You worked together, but you stayed and kept to yourself. Of course, there was conversation. Of course, we slept together. But you did not form a bond or friendship, because everybody was terrified just for their own survival. You had, of course, a commonality because you worked under the same circumstances. You feared the same thing. You worried about the same thing. Most of them, of course, were fortunate enough, with the little food we received, being young and small and maybe more resilient, we managed to get through the time that we were in Auschwitz. Then, of course, in 1945, we were asked to be ready to leave the camp. It was January at the beginning, and we were put on a death march, which simply means you collect a huge number of people, put them into a column of 4 or 5, and you simply say, if you don't keep up, you'll be shot, you'll be executed. So you better find your strength and courage to keep up by whatever means. And in the bitter cold of Polish winter, with no clothing and nothing of any kind of a property, they put us on a death march. If you fell behind by a designated distance, you would hear shots. But you didn't have to wait for that. The streets were covered with those that couldn't keep up, that had gone ahead. And so when you saw the most grotesque way people were executed, laying in the snowbank on the side of the road, I don't know where you find strength. I guess fear gives you strength. They put us on trains. They packed it in very densely. The trains had no roofs. There were livestock wagons open. I got pushed into the front of it, and there was standing room only. The next day, we heard noises and noticed that there were 2 fighter planes circling the train. These had insignias that I knew were not German, but I was the only one that knew German insignias on military equipment. These were Allied fighter planes. Now, we didn't know that we were taken away 10 days before Auschwitz was liberated by the Russian army. We did not know that anything had happened in Europe. We had no idea. You live in a vacuum if you live in a camp, or only rumors. Well, it was known to the Allies that Germany realized it was losing the war, and to defend Germany as a country itself was retrieving all military from all the different countries they had occupied. The Allies thought we were a returning military train by the viewing the open cars and seeing uniforms, and we were attacked by machine gun fire. And we lost about 25 to 30% of the inhabitants in each one of the wagons. The train went on. They did not attack the locomotive for whatever reason. And about 3 days later, 4 days later, the train went up a mountain and we were unloaded, and I was informed, welcome to Buchenwald. And I was back in my country in which I did not want to be born. Here it was now an elitist concentration camp, meaning the intent was to keep that camp available for important German nationals that the Nazis could not afford to kill. There were international inmates simply considered to be a better concentration camp than the others. It wasn't. It was just as bad, except they had a large contingency of German non-Jewish nationals. They kept us there for no reason whatsoever, no purpose. There were contrived work in the quarry, anything to not have you have a restful life, so to speak. And there were tortures, medical experiments, all kinds of things. And on Friday, 11th of April, after not having had food for 10 days, we were made aware of a noise coming towards us. We were all too weak to move. We couldn't hardly stand up. And a friend looked out the window and he says, I think we're being liberated. And we had seen so many people lose their mind. We figure one more doesn't make any difference. And he said, no, you have to take a look. So I, with some of the others, crawled up to the window. And as I looked out, I thought I'd lost my sanity, because I'm looking at a tank which we had been predicted would, destroy every evidence they could by guns and tanks and bulldozers. And I thought, well, I just have maybe 30 seconds or a minute to live. It's going to happen now. When I couldn't believe my eyes, the tank had a white Star of David. It was Patton's United States Third Army, which was mostly armored. He simply sent the tanks up the mountain to liberate the camp and to make sure there would not be any confusion. They painted a white Star of David onto the tank instead of the American insignia. And so we were liberated on April 11th. Always remember, at 3:15, the watchtower of the camp still has that time to this day.
Wow. Now, I remember an account where you mentioned that some of the people who climbed out of the tanks were black.
Well, the surprise, the shock was when we were laying down and the medics came in from the Third Army to sort out the ones who were more likely to live. It's called triage. And those that were near death were left behind. They took the youngsters out and put us into the building that had been vacated by the SS guards. In a matter of hours, the infantry came in. It didn't even have hours. It was very quick after the tanks made the camp secure. And we had a shock because we had never seen black people. Now, the United States Army was segregated in World War II, but Patton said, if they can kill Germans, I don't care who they are, what they look like. And he had a segregated part of the Third Army made up of black soldiers. And they came in first, followed very quickly by whites, because blacks were certainly still a very small number. That's right.
So, and I heard that perhaps there was some politics involved in that they never got any acknowledgement or
Well,
credit.
that's the shameful American history. It is not mentioned because they did not have a separate regiment or whatever it is. Now, the Japanese Americans were not sent to the Pacific. They became a very famous part of the army in Europe, but they were also poorly acknowledged. And I testified for several authors who wrote American history of the black movement and black soldiers that I witnessed that, and others did too, my friend Eva also. The idea was that we didn't know anything about politics. We didn't know America was segregated and remained segregated for many years. We had our apartheid, to say the least. And so that was kind of surprising to us, but only when I came to the United States did I learn about the unfairness and the undemocratic treatment of African Americans in this country.
Wow. Sure. So now you've obviously been liberated, but you've got no family. Where did you go
We
next?
have no family. The International Red Cross came in and took what we call data, anything you can remember about your family, names, dates of birth, where they lived, with the hope they could reunite them. Well, I had other than my uncle who went to America. That's all I knew. I had no other relatives. And then Jewish organizations came in and they proposed that I, with everybody else, go back home. Well, I'm not going to stay in Germany. I vowed I would never return in my lifetime, and I want to leave, and I didn't want to even stay in Europe. And I decided to go to France because they said there would be ships leaving to Palestine, now Israel, of course. And I decided that's where I was going to go. And I volunteered, and I was taken with 424 out of 926 liberated boys, the largest number of juveniles found in all camps throughout Europe, in Buchenwald. We went to France and were put into orphanages. We were slowly recovering. We were very proud of growing hair again, very important for boys. And I signed up to go up to Palestine on the ship by the name of Wakefield, which was on mid-ocean, rechristened the Exodus. And I had every plan to go there. I didn't want to remain in Europe. 2 weeks before the departure, a gentleman came in from the United States Embassy in Paris, telling me that the information I had given to the Red Cross in Buchenwald, including my uncle's name, he located me in Los Angeles by reading a Jewish newspaper, the B'nai B'rith Messenger, and other papers that listed newly discovered survivors' names every Friday afternoon. And I came on the very first ship leaving Europe with civilian passengers to the United States in April 1946. A miracle.
That is just incredible that you landed up despite all the different twists and turns along your journey. And then you obviously went to school in the US because you obviously didn't get to go to school during that period.
I went to school for 1 year and a half. Of course, I spoke and wrote only German. I picked up a little French while I was there for less than a year, but that didn't last. And so when I came to the United States, I was just a stranger among good people. I was given extra English instructions because one school was designated to take in all incoming refugees from all over the world to give them intensified English language. Of course, I was empty-brained. I had not gone to school, and apparently anxious to absorb as much as I could. I graduated a little earlier than I was supposed to, and was eligible to go, of all things, to your university, something I would never have ever thought. This was especially important to me because my uncle and my aunt had no children, and they never made a decent living. They worked in a gasoline station. And here I was coming in, dropping out of the sky to create a 3-member family. And so I committed myself that I would work. And for 10 years after arriving, I worked at night in the service station to make our life more feasible, but more important, the rescue that I received by taking me in made me feel obligated. And even to the point that I lived with them. I did not get married till I was 42 years after they passed away. I felt that was my obligation, my duty, and of course, gratitude. Remarkably enough, I decided to be a dentist because of major dental problems from malnutrition. Only found out that I was rejected by a famous university here in Los Angeles, University of Southern California, or USC, which had a policy against Jews. And so I was rejected. I qualified, but I was rejected. If you had money to pay, you got in. It's a private school, very famous in the United States. A building right next to the school, which had no connection to the school itself, the School of Dentistry, was the College of Optometry. I saw the building. I was studying with a young man who was going to be an optometrist because his father was. And I said, well, Jerry is a very bright student. I'll make an application. I was accepted and I entered school, and I had no idea what an optometrist does. No idea. In 2014, I finally retired after 60 years practicing optometry.
60 years?
60 years. 50 years, I had my own solo practice. I sold it. And I jokingly say, I was afflicted with a chronic condition immediately called boredom. And so I decided to work for the largest medical organization in the United States called Kaiser Permanente. And I was accepted and hired at the age of 75. There are not many companies in this country that will do that.
No.
And talk about gratitude. And I stayed there for 10 years. For 50 years, I was at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, half of the time heading the Department of Optometry, a volunteer service. For 40 years, I've been speaking at the Museum of Tolerance, which has a great deal to offer. There is a second museum in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust, and I've been speaking there since its founding. And so I figured I'd make a little contribution to educating people who come there on their own, interested to find out, just like here the audience today.
Wow, I think that is, look, there's a lot of luck that you hit along the way, because just in terms of the fact that all these things aligned, it's almost unlikely that you should be with us today.
It is very unlikely. German-born, I was sick all my life, the first 12 years. I had every imaginable childhood sickness except polio. And for some miraculous reason, I had cataract surgery this year, That was the only ailment, the only health conditions since 1941.
Wow.
I still am lucky enough not to take any medicines, never had to.
Well, I mean, what I'm amazed at is how lucid and how accurate you are with all your dates and all your facts. And I can't even remember where I put my keys.
These things you don't forget. And of course, this is only a schedule. I mean, a sketchy detail.
Of course, of course. So now I've got a whole bunch of questions that I want to throw at you. And I know that we've got Maria in Argentina and we've got Dondi in Hungary. We've got a whole bunch of people who are viewing the YouTube version live as well. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Just give me a wave and then you guys can ask. But the first thing I want to ask is, are you in touch with any of the people that you were in the camp with?
Well, to begin with, I had what you might call as close a friend as you could have, because we had to bunk together. You know, you had no beds. You just slept on wooden slats. He lived in Long Island. I dedicated my book to him because when I wrote a book after 70 years with a non-Jewish patient of mine, he passed away a week before the book was published and was dedicated. That was a friendship. We had no connections whatsoever, but I had a trip to Australia, and in a museum I found a little placard for a exhibit that had been paid for by a man who put his name on it and also his tattoo number. And he was 8 people behind me. Unfortunately, he passed away, but his family has been in touch with me. They've come to visit just to trace down the history of their father. I had the youngest boy in Buchenwald was 8 years old. Obviously never had to go through Auschwitz because there would never have been a chance. He was watched by his brother from a labor camp, and he went to France with me, with Eli Wiesel, and I know he went to Israel. It was known to me that he became the chief rabbi of Israel.
Wow.
First of Tel Aviv, then of all of Israel, and is now back again as chief rabbi of Tel Aviv and the head of Yad Vashem. When I was in Israel 3 months ago, I had a chance to meet with him. And that was a meeting that was hard to describe. It's also found on the internet. There will be a whole, maybe almost a documentary. Those are the only relationships that we had. I did hear of a friend that lived back in New York, but we never had a chance to meet. So you didn't develop close friendship. You have only something in common if you discover yourself. That turned out to be maybe a friendship developed here. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you obviously didn't want to go back to Germany, and that is something that I could certainly understand, and you certainly probably wouldn't want to go back to visit the camps because of the painful memories that you have. But from what I can understand, you have been back.
You did. I did.
So what was the
Germans?
And then how did you feel about going back?
Okay. Again, a coincidence. A friend of my cousin, my wife's cousin, had Google Earth. He showed me with a great deal of pride what it does, and he said, well, let's take a look at Cologne, what it looks like. And I wasn't interested, but he was proud. And so as he surveyed the streets, he noticed little yellow squares all over the city. And he had zoom, and he zoomed in, and there were names of people, of the Jewish people in front of the building from which they were taken. These are little plates that are raised up in the so that you don't step on it. And if you don't pick up your feet, you will stumble. So they call them stumble plates in German. He couldn't find me or my parents. So he made an inquiry in Cologne. Was it the first address where we had to vacate, or where we were taken away? Well, the city of Cologne discovered me, and they asked me to please come and visit Germany. And I said, not in your life. I made a commitment. I will not ever go back to German soil. They said, but there is a reason. It is now going to be 70 years that 2011 citizens from the city of Cologne, which included you and your parents and the rest of the family, were taken away. Only 23 survived the war. And you are the only one left out of 2011.
Wow.
Well, I decided with my family, reluctantly, I'm going to go to Cologne. And when the people asked me, but Henry, after 70 years and you swore you would never go, why now? And the only answer is one finger, the middle finger. I think you know that gesture.
So it was like it was a protest to go.
It was that one finger gesture and the speeches I made. Oh, it was quite a trip. Then I did go back a second time in 2015, last year, for the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Buchenwald, when I found out from hundreds of it in the past, and this time only 68 people showed up. And I wanted to go back for the same reason. And of all the people there, I was the only one born in Germany. All the others came from Poland, France, you know. There are, I'm sure, more alive, but they are either too old or not interested, or sometimes simply too far away. There were 4 I know that live in Melbourne. They send greetings and all that. So I did go back, and it was worthwhile just to show the defiance and the privilege to be alive and have survived it, to rub it in and give Germans certain messages. As a matter of fact, in gratitude for my 2 appearances and return, my book is being translated, it's being expanded, and it will become mandatory reading for all the students in the city of Cologne, and perhaps maybe in Germany.
How does that make you feel?
Strange. I don't look for publicity. I don't look for acknowledgement. But if it has some value to teach people what their own people did, with no reservation of any kind, supporting the killing of their own citizen, and maybe it'll make it a little bit better Germany. Although right now, since the election, it doesn't look like anti-Semitism or anything like this will easily disappear from Germany.
Well, and I do want to spend some time talking about that, because that's the part that obviously my motivation for interviewing people like you is that there's an important message that we need to get out there to educate people. But, you know, when you say that history repeats itself, my fear is that a lot of the same signs that started off the beginning, where the parents said, listen, it's just a small group of people making a bit of noise, just ignore them. It's just a few posters. It's just a few physical assaults. It's not going to be permanent. Those are the kinds of things that started happening when you were younger.
Well, I saw these things repeated. Exactly, the demonstration with the flares and the flags and the yelling and screaming and the slogans. But forgive me for saying this. How do people feel in your country? The history of apartheid. Are there parties or remnants who would think it's still the right thing? What did it take to get to a democratic country after all these years throughout history? So every country, United States, South Africa, any country, harbors hatred, injustice. Fortunately, it has to take the majority of people not to let that flourish. I have used an expression that the seed of injustice, the seed of hatred, exists in any soil in the world. It's just better not be nourished, and if I may say, with waste, with human waste, to have it grow and flourish into a devastating plant of injustice.
And that I get, because I mean, effectively, it's certain people with the hatred inside that builds this ignorance, and we were talking earlier. I did an interview with Christian Picciolini, who is a former neo-Nazi, and he now runs a movement, a non-profit, where they are taking people who've left the movement and trying to bridge the gaps between people who were in his situation, were recruited into the neo-Nazi movement. And he said that he wasn't from a family that hated people. He was just a young kid who was out there. He was a loner. And these people came in and said,
that's the word.
And they said to him, we'll look after you.
A loner, or people who are lost, find a common cause, even if it's hate. It strengthens them. It makes them heroes in the group. It makes them outcasts to the rest of them. At least they are getting attention. They're being listened to, and that will strengthen and will encourage people to join movements that have no business to exist, except they have the right to exist if you live in the country that claims to have freedom.
Well, what was interesting in his story is that he even headed a skinhead band, and he only produced hate music, and he decided to open up a music store to sell all this hate music, but he wasn't getting enough customers. So he decided to sell other types of music, and that's when he got to meet Black and Jewish and Hispanic customers. And when they came in, they were nothing like what he was taught.
Of course.
And that's where he started to have a change of heart, where he actually met the real people.
Now you have to remember, the Nazis too, the German population hated Jews without ever having met any Jews. The main support came from the countryside, not the cosmopolitan cities. They knew better. But if you vote and you make it come to support them, and if it serves a purpose against even crimes of humanity, they were willing to go. In this country, in the United States, you have a section of the country, the South, which always is behind in education, always in economy. Then people remind me, Sir Henry, don't forget, you live in California, the most progressive state, the most liberal state, the most democratic state. This is not the South. As here you have gangs that are mostly Hispanic and Black, because of the abundance of the population. In California, and actually in Los Angeles, white people are the minority, with the Asians, and from all over the place, from the Middle East. And we live together with no particular problem. People get along with one another. When they used the expression, this is a melting pot, I was corrected by a student and said, I don't believe there is such a thing as a melting pot. Melting pot means everybody is the same, looks the same. No, we are like a salad bowl. Every individual keeps their identity. We are just tossed together. You're the onion and you're and whatever it is, the croutons, we are tossed together. And he said, the only thing that keeps us going is the salad dressing. But everything, and I never used the word melting pot again. But this
Wow.
is close to it because we do live here with our crime, yes, but then you have that everywhere.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
So now, we've now obviously reached the end of our interview, but I still have a million questions. What about the feelings of hatred and anger? And before you even get onto that question, how long did it take you to process what you had been through? Did you go for counseling?
No.
Did you have any physical or mental or emotional ramifications for all the things that you had been through?
No. My father was a very humorous man. Unfortunately, with the condition to live there, suffered from depression, but he was humorous. I've always been full of nonsense, even as a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
I was always called the naughty little Henry. That may have helped. I never developed deep-seated hate, disgust, and disrespect, whatever it is. Of course, I didn't like anything about the Germans,
Mm-hmm.
but I made a concession, a decision. I will not hate when I'm entitled to hate. I will not allow anything to get into my head that doesn't belong there. I don't know where it came from. I was certainly, with no education, was an intellectual achievement. I never smoked. I never drank, with the apprehension that I will have things scramble my brain. I always say the Germans may have done things to me, to my body, but I wouldn't let them get into my head. I would not develop hate. I would not develop prejudice. And I wouldn't certainly, never, ever in the world, use a drug to scramble my brain and ruin my life and ultimately accomplish what the Germans had to do years and years ago. And with that, apparently, I've been lucky. I never had nightmares. I have weird dreams, but never had nightmares. Most of my friends that I noticed with the same background have very disturbed sleep. I was never analyzed, although the German government forced me here for war reparation to be seen and evaluated. And I'm supposed to have 6 visits. And after the second visit, the psychiatrist says, Henry, count your blessings. You are one of very few who has been able in their mind miraculously to sort out not to let these things ruin your life for the rest of the years that you have. You don't have to come and see me again unless you want to. So I have no idea how one person can be so exceedingly blessed, or I call it lucky, since I don't have a conviction of somebody blessing me. It is just.
Have you been back to any of the camps? You know, they have the March of the Living, and they have a lot of these things where people go and visit Auschwitz. I mean, I know you've been to Cologne, but did you ever go back to Auschwitz and Birkenau?
No, I would not go back to Auschwitz. I would have memories I would not like to rekindle or strengthen. I had planned to go last year,
Mm-hmm.
but the arrangement was that I would have to lecture and we would have to eat on the bus and all that. It was just something that I wasn't. It would be interesting to go back to the ghetto,
Mm-hmm.
but I can do very well without that. Buchenwald was enough.
I can imagine.
No, I would love to have the only reason I had planned to go to March of the Living, because after that, everybody was taken to Israel. And I'd never been to Israel except 2 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
which is another different story. And I did meet my cousin's daughter, who survived in Holland. She's 10
Uh-huh.
years younger, who was located by the German administration of the museum I'm working with. They want to do something for me, having come back and spoken there, and they discover her living outside of Tel Aviv. And when we did go to Israel 2 months ago, she was waiting in the hotel lobby when I arrived.
Wow.
My only living relative, after never having met in 72 years.
That's incredible. I mean, now with
Yeah.
the internet and a lot of the old records being digitized, there's a good chance that you might find certain information or things about your life and your family that you probably didn't know is out there.
Well, I have pretty well and thoroughly. Germany did an incredible job in the documents that they have. I did find out from the knowledge of my cousin's grandmother that I knew she had survived. I knew it in 1951 and 52. And when she was old enough, her grandmother had passed away. She didn't keep in touch. I did find out she married somebody that they went to Israel, but I only knew her first and maiden name. I didn't know the married name. And the city of Venlo in Holland is not digitized, so they sent somebody and he went through all the marriage records till he found her maiden name, then the married name, and the fact that they went to Israel and we found each other.
That is
after
incredible.
72 years.
Sure. So in conclusion, after all your life experiences, you obviously give a lot of talks trying to educate people. You now see what's going on in governments around the world. What would you like to see happening in terms of, what would you propose as a solution to our current economic, this political situation around the world?
Well, since it's around the world, there must be obviously some basic common reason or reasoning, faulty as it may be, for people to take different stances. The United States is pathetic. We have a president who, I don't even know, well, I won't even mention it since it goes on other media. I won't mention the thing. But totally incompetence. You have, of course, other countries seeing the weakness of the United States, and they figured, well, he is at least not in opposition to some radical right. Why don't we have the same right? If the United States can do it, we can do it. Mm-hmm. Your vote is the thing that counts. Your contribution to showing any kind of resistance, objection, maybe even demonstration to get people's attention. But it still comes down to the basic history of each country. We all have a lot of dirt that we bury. We all have a lot of history we wish we didn't have. History that was actually done by our own citizens and by our own government. The United States is a government, is a history of violence. We have refugees and immigrants come to this continent and slaughter the Native American. We had the founding fathers, democratic as they were, shall we say, grammatically, were slaveholders, but did not protect that in our Constitution. We had a country that was truly divided between North and South, that fought a terrible, terrible civil war. After that, we had street justice, the Wild West, where everybody carried a pistol on each side of the hip, and the birth of a 4 million member American terrorist organization called the Ku Klux Klan. Then we had the glamorization of prohibition, the gangsters, the bootleggers. with the cars shooting each other up. And then we had, of course, the movies glorifying crime and injustice and partiality. The cowboys always won, the Indians always lost. And then we had, of course, the development of television and movies. Movies were always a big entertainment with very, very powerful indoctrination of what people were watching. Then with television, we had the propagation of crime, and everything is police shows and murder shows. And then the worst thing, I think, video games, which are based only on shooting and killing. You don't have any puzzles. You don't have any, not much entertainment. Everybody is a gun-toting big shot fighting some kind of imaginary enemy. And now we even have in virtual reality. So other countries are very much the same. This is not exclusive to the United States. I'm only giving an example. We must look at our history in every country and come to our senses and what is right for all of us, not just for a few of us.
Wow. I mean, I didn't expect that sort of in-depth analysis. I mean, that is pretty much, I mean, you've touched on many nerves there, and I think rightly so, that, you know, nothing happens. It's not just one or two things. It's many aspects all coming together, and you know, a more permissive society, allowing certain people viewpoints despite the fact that they are anti one group or another. The fact that we've got refugees going into Europe and being kicked out. I mean, can you imagine if you had just come out of the Holocaust and you were treated the way that many of these refugees were treated? I mean, in the beginning, you weren't allowed to go to certain countries.
Right. The thing is that you have to consider human rights. I'm very much involved with human rights organizations, which is different from country to country to country. It is basically based on the haves, keeping out the have-nots. Everybody feels threatened. People don't see the reality that if you have more people, you can do more business. They can live a proper life and would make contributions to the society, the economy, and hopefully the political system being democratic. Other countries, they'll still keep people under control, and they don't know any better. And they sometimes don't even care any better. Education is the answer. Talking, lecturing is a little part of it. You almost have to live in each country or different countries to know what's right and what's wrong, and then hopefully learn from it and bring it back to your own country. It just isn't going to be done by books or videos or even lectures. It's in your heart and your mind that you have to find whatever is justice and equality. That's the only way you can live.
Wow. So then my last question is, when are you running for president?
That's funny. I know I could do a better job than the one we have.
Well, I'm quite confident on that one. I think that, not that I'm saying anyone could do a better job, but I'm thinking that, you know, they say that common sense is not as common as it used to be. And I think that someone with your outlook on life could certainly benefit the majority of the people living in the US.
Well, common sense will hopefully come to most people sooner or later, by whatever means, and people hopefully will wake up to a more just world. That's for sure.
Well, I really appreciate your time and your passion. I know it's not always the easiest topic to talk about, and I know that you only gave us a very light dusting of some of the stuff that you went through, because, you know, it could have been, I mean, if we listen to the real details, especially for the younger kids, it could be quite disturbing. The fact that you've managed to make it this far, that you've made a success of yourself, you are evidence, proof that we can prevail.
Oh, yes.
And I think that the very fact that you are sitting here is evidence that we have prevailed. And I really do appreciate that you've taken the time, and I look forward to obviously promoting your book. You've got a wonderful book out there, and I'll post all the links to that as well. And we'll keep in touch, because you never know. Yeah. There are some very interesting people out there that I'd love to connect
But I want to thank you for arranging it, and I want to thank everybody in the audience that have participated for giving their time and showing their interest in what I hope will be perhaps a better world in their lifetime. Mine, I'm not worried about, but in their lifetime, you have many years ahead. Make the effort to make it a better world, because you normally have the power to do it.
Well, we're expecting you to still be around for the next 30 years or so. So there's still many more talks and opportunities to share your story with the rest of the world. And I know that Dondi in Hungary says thank you very much. And I know Maria had to leave from Argentina, and Mr. McNulty and his group in America, they obviously had to leave. But we've had viewers from around the world who've been watching this live. And the best part is that afterwards, people who didn't get a chance to see it live will still be able to watch the YouTube video as well.
Not only that,
thank you so much.
List my email number, my email address. Whoever it is that wants to have some information or question, I promise I answer every one of them.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll get them to email me, and I'll send you one email with those questions. Makes it a little bit easier for you.
That'll be fine.
Wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the broadcast here.